Good evening.
I think Linda's trying to get in.
My name is Mayor Kamal Johnson, and I want to welcome you to the presentation on police reform. I want to give thanks to the members of our Police Advisory and Reconciliation Committee, Joan Hunt, Theo Anthony, Linda Friedner, Elizabeth Dickey, Vern Cross, council members Jane Trombley and Dewan Sarwar, as well as Greg Mosley, Cheryl Roberts, Hudson Police Department members Sergeant Philly and Sergeant Franklin. I want to thank our Commissioner, Shane Bauer, and our Chief of Police, Ed Moore. I want to thank all of the community groups and organizations for your part in this process. Change isn't always welcome, and it isn't always easy, but it's often necessary. And sometimes we have to go through difficult conversations in order to arrive at necessary outcomes. Police reform doesn't mean that our police department is neither good or bad, as well as our officers. Does that mean that what happens nationally happens here in Hudson? No, but it doesn't exclude that policing in general has been rooted in systematic racism, lack of trust in communities of color, and police brutality. Killings happen all across the nation, and these are not isolated incidents. These are symptoms of a broken system. What you will see tonight will not be all the answers to fix that system, but it's the first step in the right direction. It's our officers coming to the table, willing to listen, but also willing to be heard. We also understand that our officers have needs and a hard job as well. And we will be implementing different recommendations to help our police department as well, including an employee assistance program. As a community, we have to stop living in this box where change means division. There is no easy fix, and there is no conversation that will not be difficult and met with different opinions and experiences. Reform cannot be as simple as putting a camera on your chest or hiring Black and brown individuals to work in a system that is not designed for people who look like them. Reform takes time and patience and a re-education of all parties involved. In this reform package, you will see us as a community take a serious look at policing for the betterment of our community as a whole. So now I'd like to introduce one of the members of our park committee, Linda Friedner.
Hi, thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. I do want to say that this is a really great way to end an eventful week. We started on Monday, remembering Dr. King. Wednesday, we had our inauguration, and now we're having Friday night talking about police reform in Hudson, which I think is quite fitting and fits in with the spirit of this whole week. I just want to talk about how we worked and what our process was. I know that the county process, was broadcast and Zoom meetings, and people were able to see people making speeches and might have wondered what was going on in Hudson from June or July until now. And as the mayor just said, conversations, difficult conversations, lengthy conversations, community conversations. As you heard, our committee was comprised of people from all parts of the community. We had all of our ethnic, racial, cultural communities represented. We had police officers, we had younger people, we have older people, we have lifetime residents of Hudson, some who were mentored by other people on the committee in their childhood, and we had relatively new members of the community who are nonetheless dedicated to a better Hudson. And when we started, as the mayor said, the first qualification that he asked me about is, are you able to have difficult conversations? And that was really what we knew our mission was going to be. And we had hoped and talked about doing something of a listening tour where we would go around from ward to ward, community to community, to talk to everybody, asking questions. And obviously, COVID and the conditions because of that got in the way of how we thought we might do that. But it didn't stop us. One of the great things that we were able to do was to create a survey, which many of you probably did fill out and are aware of. We were helped with that by another longtime Hudson resident, Katie Helverson, who is a data scientist, and she really helped to design the survey so that it would elicit the most helpful and thorough responses. And more important, she analyzed and created a report of those responses, which without her, we would never have been able to do. The way that we collected our responses was obviously people filled it out online, but we did use it to go into the community. There were a number of events this summer. There was a Get Out the Vote event that our own Theo Anthony helped to organize. There were small community events, and we would go to those events with our survey and talk to people who, we had iPads so that they could fill them out, or we would talk them through it. Liz Dickey, who's another member of the committee, and I went door to door in Bliss Towers with Quentin Cross and Tiffany Garriga to talk to people personally, and to walk them through it. Not everybody is comfortable filling out something on an iPad. And through that, we were able to meet people and have more extensive conversations that we could report on as well. And that was very, frankly, very rewarding, I think, for all of us, to really have those conversations and understand the different communities that live in Hudson. In addition, just frankly, in our own group, because we came from so many different communities within the group, we had a lot of those sort of the microcosm of Hudson, and a lot of those difficult conversations among ourselves, talking about what police officers needed, talking about maybe citizens' concerns about what was going on with the police. Those were some difficult conversations. They were done on Zoom, and you can't, unless you turn your video off, you can't really hide on a Zoom call. You can see people's faces. You can see how they really feel about something. And I think that we did all learn a lot from each other. Officer Franklin, who you're going to hear from soon, she and I spent literally hours together, where we were ostensibly planning how we were going to write the report. But I think really we were mostly talking together, getting to know each other, learning who we were and what we each brought to the table. And I can say that again, what everybody has in common is that they love Hudson and they want Hudson to be a great place. So this was a long process. A couple of our members brought other expertise to the table. Theo Anthony, who you're going to hear from tonight, is really an expert in use of force, body cam technology. He is a filmmaker, and he's already on his own worked in this area. So he did incredible research on best practices in other districts, other police departments throughout the nation, as well as research that has been done by outside parties. Joan Hunt, who unfortunately isn't able to join us tonight, who is the director, as you may know, of Greater Hudson Promise. Her specialty is working with families who are in fact affected by incarceration. And so she brought that perspective, which is, on the periphery, if you might say, of policing. Officer Franklin is going to speak to us from the police perspective, because we certainly did learn that, as any of us know, job conditions really affect how you do your job, and that it wouldn't be right to ignore the needs of police officers and the police department and the challenges that they were facing. And some of those were frankly quite unique in Hudson, because as we know, Hudson was very successful in the face of COVID in creating a wonderful place for people outside of the city to come once the quarantine and once lockdown started loosening. So we had visitors come to eat at our restaurants and shop in our stores, and raise the economics of the city, which was great. But it also was an influx of people who don't really know anything about Hudson and came with their own thoughts about life, and what their expectations may be, and that create an extra layer certainly of issues for the police to contend with, which is tourism, et cetera, that we normally have, but not really to the level that we had this summer. Um, and so we all really, as I said, we worked together. We had a lot of conversations together. We met biweekly. We were out in the community at those events as I described. Vern Cross and I also went again to Bliss Towers, talked to other people. So I do feel that over time we got to know a lot of people. We got to know each other, and we really have did have the listening tour. We did have the difficult conversations, and ultimately, what we provided to the mayor was a summary of that and what came out of it, what we think would be the best practices moving forward with police reform in Hudson. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to the mayor, and just to again thank everybody who's joining us tonight, and to all of my fellow members of the Park Committee. It was a pleasure and an honor to work with you.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you to the entire committee for all the months of hard work. I want to add a couple of things. So the full report is on the city website at cityofhudson.org, and also you'll see our year one kind of goals that will be kind of taken on. So after this meeting, we're looking for a week from today to have a public hearing where give everybody a chance to kind of take everything in that you're going to hear about tonight and that you'll read about in the report. If you have any questions, recommendations, that'll be the time for the public to kind of give any voice to it. We don't want to leave anyone out. So without further ado now, I want to introduce Sergeant Mashonda Franklin. I thought it was very important to have the Hudson Police a part of this. You can't really reform the police department without their input, because they are the ones who are patrolling day to day. They know a lot of what policies will work for them, and we wanted to make sure that this was a team effort as much as possible. So Sergeant Franklin, floor is all yours.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'd like to start by saying it was an honor, and it is an honor, to be a member of PARC, along with my coworkers, Sergeant Philly and now Officer Mauzoff. I believe PARC was formulated for good reason, and I think it's a true catalyst in what police reform for the city of Hudson is going to look like in the future. And I think it's necessary that we have these difficult conversations. And as Linda said, we had a lot of difficult conversations. Often it was frustrating, trying to listen to all walks of life, hearing different perspectives, and being able to listen to understand one another. We broke down some barriers in a safe space. They all happened on Zoom. We were able to see one another. COVID definitely put a damper on being able to meet with people, but as Linda said, we actually met several times to go over different things, how the report was going to be written, and just getting to know one another and building that relationship. So to start, policing. Like policing, the official term could be defined as maintaining law and order. We all took an oath. I took an oath to protect and serve my community. I was born and raised here. I hold it dear to my heart. So it is very important to me and my fellow officers to have trust with our community and to be able to build our relationships that promote trust and create a positive experience as opposed to a negative one. Going back to the survey that resulted from all of our discussions in PARC, thanks to Katie Hilverman, I think we got a lot of answers that needed to be brought up. It wasn't indicative. The results of the survey that everyone has access to now, I don't believe were indicative of how respondents or how community members felt about HPD specifically. but more likely police as an institution. And we have to try to be part of that change, to adjust, I would say, people's perspective on policing and police as an institution here in the city of Hudson. Um, we understand the need for those changes, and that we have to listen to the perspective of our community members, as well as we equally would like the community members to hear our perspective as well. Um, Things that have been happening nationally, globally, certainly have created high tensions between the police and community members here and everywhere, major cities across the US. And we want to recognize that we have to adjust our way of thinking, be forward thinking, and be open minded to be able to create positive interactions for the future and to continue to build trust with the community. So that being said, the police department came up with several recommendations, but there's a few that I wanted to touch on today. I know, Mayor, you already spoke about the employee assistance program. Our job is very demanding of our emotions, even though we may not show them, even though we kind of hold those to us. We're expected to handle situations that can be very high stress and put our own thoughts and feelings aside. And we don't always have an outlet to be able to express that outside of work. So the employee assistance program was certainly one that was important to me, because I think that helps officers, members, to be able to handle stress and to be able to cope, whether it's at work or at home or in any area of their life. Would like to increase training. I know that was something that was brought up several times in Park, that we discussed increased training for officers. And we believe that increasing training specific to officer strengths would work volumes. You know, I know that Cheryl said she was going to touch on mental health stuff later on. But if you know that there's officers who are very patient, maybe they had been mediators in school, or they have done some social work training prior to employment, they may be better suited to be trained in handling certain situations than another officer. So I think it's a big discussion that needs to be had within our department, so that we can make those adjustments, and just be proactive with that. We'd like to implement a community ride-along program, as well as programs like Coffee with a Cop and an Explorer program. I really like the idea of Coffee with a Cop, and I believe it would really speak to the community members. It's a program that facilitates and encourages positive community police relations. So community members and HPD officers who are not on duty can meet in a neutral space to speak informally. So it's not a town hall, there's no agenda, no calls for service, no radios involved. It's just uninterrupted time where people can speak about their concerns and build relationships. Similar to what Linda and I did several times. I also spoke with Jane. I spoke with Katie Hilverman outside of Park about the survey and maybe other suggestions and recommendations. Tried to get together with Theo, but we both were kind of a little busy and weren't able to do that, but hopefully in the future that we can. But that Coffee with a Cop should be able to break down barriers between the police and the community members, where community members can feel that they can go to officers and voice their concerns without feeling like they're being spoken at. And then officers can feel that they can open up and maybe be a little bit more vulnerable, which isn't something that we often do with community members. And I think that would be very good for the police and our community members. Sergeant Philly and Officer Mauzoff, we collectively came up with these ideas that we can try to implement hopefully this year, but it may not happen just with COVID. To implement a program like that, there would be more training for your leaders of the program. But the training includes issues of community policing, social media techniques, cultural awareness, officer citizen engagement, and then developing and maintaining citizen trust, which is, I think, a huge part of these hard conversations that we've been having. And then the Police Explorer program, which is a little different than the ride along programs, but the Police Explorer programs, which also requires training, it's actually a biannual training for the leaders of that program to provide mentorship and a hands-on program for young adults who are interested in a career in law enforcement or a related field in the criminal justice system. It promotes awareness of the criminal justice system with training, practical experiences that develop communication and decision making and problem solving. And then it's a way to encourage diversity and build trust between the police department and today's youth, which is equally, maybe even more important than just our community members, right? A huge barrier for us, I think, is with the youth and that lack of understanding between police and youth. And I think we have to have more conversations and try to promote such programs so that we can build on those relationships. And I think that was it. But I again want to say thank you for being a part of PARC, and I really hope that we can make some changes for the positive.
Thank you, Sergeant. So we actually are waiting on a few grants to help out with some of these programs. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll have some big announcements. We understand that some of these recommendations are going to take some funding, and we've already taken the steps to acquire that funding. So at this time, I'd like to pass it to Cheryl Roberts, who is representing the Greenberger Center. When we first started putting together police reform, we knew that we had to tackle it from a wide lens, and that serious mental illness was something, and substance abuse was something that we definitely have to plan for. So I was thankful for the Greenberger Center to partner with us, along with everyone else that's a part of the Transitions to Treatment Committee. So Cheryl, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. It's an honor to be working with you as both Corporation Counsel and to the Greenberger Center. Excuse me. What I'm going to talk about is really separate from the PARC. And as you suggested, Mayor, we knew from the start that really to have meaningful criminal justice reform, we had to come to terms with the fact that over the last 50 years, we have criminalized millions of Americans that have serious mental illness. Right now, the people most at risk in an encounter with the police are actually Black men with untreated serious mental illness. Generally, people with untreated mental illness, excuse me, are about 16 times more likely to be killed by police in an encounter than others. The Washington Post has been looking at this issue for the last 6 years or so, and what they've come up with is that nationally, people with mental illness make up about a quarter of the people who are killed in police encounters. The Treatment Advocacy Center really focuses on this population, and they have done some studies that suggest it's even as high as 50% of those killed. So this is clearly a terrible statistic, and it's not one that we can lay exclusively at the feet of the police. I think that this statistic really falls on us all of us who have accepted for the last several decades the politicians and the policies that have deinstitutionalized people with mental illness, serious mental illness, without at the same time providing adequate funds and the psychiatric beds needed or the safe supportive treatment in the community. this movement to deinstitutionalize people was really based on good intentions, was well-intentioned. Actually, JFK signed, the last bill he signed before he was assassinated was a bill to take money away from psychiatric facilities or asylums and put it into the community. He wanted to deinstitutionalize people. The problem was the funding never followed, and people came out of asylums and ended up in jails and prisons and on the streets. So that promise of better treatment never really materialized, nor did it turn out that the psychotropic drugs that were, the panacea, supposed to be the panacea, they never really turned out to be exactly as effective as had hoped. And in fact, for some people, it exacerbated their symptoms, and those people would turn to drugs and alcohol, which is another part of the problem here and why people are being trans-institutionalized from facilities into the criminal justice system. And that has to do with policies around our drug and sentencing laws. So just a quick history on our drug laws. They didn't start with Reagan. They actually started our modern drug laws with Richard Nixon. And the intent, as his aides later would tell us, was to actually target, quote, Black people and hippies and with these drug charges and get them out of the community. Unfortunately, their intention worked pretty well. What they didn't intend was that people with serious mental illness would also be caught up in these drug and sentencing policies, because it is often the case that people with serious mental illness have a co-occurring substance use disorder, or they self-medicate. So all of these policies together over the last 40 or 50 years, as I suggested, have really caused a mass incarceration of people with mental illness. And just to put it in perspective, a few statistics. In 1960, we had about 550,000 psychiatric beds in this country, and about 150,000 people were incarcerated. And that includes people in state and federal prison and jail. Today, we have unbelievably 2.2 million people incarcerated, and about 1 million of those people have mental illness, and about 20% have serious mental illness. So there really has been a trans-institutionalization of people from asylums, as they were called, to prisons and jails. I just want to point out that, to add insult to injury here, the asylums really never went away. They just really morphed into two types. For wealthy white people, they're called places like Silver Hill and Austin Riggs. And for people who are poor, particularly Black and brown people, they're called prisons and jails or the streets. So this situation is just unacceptable, inhumane, and wastes taxpayer money at the very least. Here in Columbia County, we've experienced this as well. I couldn't get statistics at the county level, but I will tell you, as a licensed bond agent, anecdotally, for the Columbia County Bail Fund, I bailed out people over about a 2.5-year period. And I would say easily 90% of the people that I bailed out from Columbia County had either a mental illness, a substance use disorder, or both. So what are we going to do about this? Given all this background, the long history, and what's happening here in Hudson, the mayor early on decided to take this issue on. And of course, it should be fixed at the federal level or the state level, but we're going to take it where we are. And we gathered county officials together, including Matt Morrell, chairman of the County Board of Supervisors, and Kathy Eldridge, supervisor of Greenport. We also have people like Dan Alamasi, who is the head of Columbia County Mental Health, Bob Gibson from DSS, Judge Coig, Judge Nichols. We have Robert Lopez from 911. And then we have many providers for health nonprofits, such as Beth Schuster from Twin Counties, Jeff Robitz from Mental Health Association, and Joan Hunt from Greater Promise Neighborhood. So all these folks have come together, and we are undertaking what's called a mapping project, more specifically called sequential intercept mapping. And it's about what it sounds like. We are mapping the community. We are trying to identify all the resources that we have in the community to deal with this population. And then what happens to someone who has serious mental illness as they come through and touch the different points in the system, from pre-arrest to arrest to arraignment and right on through to reentry. And the goal of this is to identify the gaps in the system where people are falling through and entering into the criminal justice system where, frankly, nobody wants them. It's police didn't sign up to be mental health, care providers, and it's not really where their strengths lie. And so we have done some, I think, really important work. We're not ready to release it yet. I'm hoping in the next couple of months we can provide a report to the mayor. We've identified some, not unsurprising gaps, and I think we are on the path to finding some creative solutions, innovative solutions, and holistic ways to, excuse me, deal with this population. So I'm looking forward to it, to providing the report to the mayor. It's just been an honor to do this work, and happy to be part of the evening's program tonight.
Thank you, Cheryl. Get yourself a glass of water.
I know, I have a little allergies. I'm sorry. Excuse me. It's not COVID.
Yeah, serious mental illness was something that, we definitely wanted to take serious in our community and find out where those gaps are. I mean, I'm excited for where we're going to be in the next few months. I know we have some announcements that are kind of headed towards final stages. So I would say definitely stay tuned. We'll be able to give you more breaking news. But now I'd like to transfer over to Theo Anthony. And when police reform first started getting popular, and it was the thing to do when the governor issued his executive order, one thing I noticed is a lot of municipalities and leaders were saying, we got body cameras, as if that was the main fix for everything. So it was great to have the park committee and Theo be able to look more in depth to our body camera policy and things that are happening across our nation with body cameras as well. So, Theo will give you a much more in-depth and elaborate presentation than I can. So Theo, the floor is yours.
All right, amazing. Can everyone hear me? All right, cool. I'm gonna share the screen. I made a presentation. I'm gonna try and keep this really concise for people in the both my friends and people in the park committee know that I can kind of go off down some wormholes and talk for a bit. So I'm gonna stick to the message. Okay, is that showing the main screen? The police advisory, give me a thumbs up. Yes. Okay. Cool. All right. So as the mayor said, my name's Theo Anthony. I'm a filmmaker and full-time resident here in Hudson. I came to this. I'm not a politician. I'm not a police officer, but I've spent almost the last 5 years of my life researching body cameras and making a film about body cameras and the history of surveillance. So I've been in this space a while, and it was really cool to take all this knowledge that I had learned and apply it in a political sphere where hopefully we can see some really positive change. So yeah, in this short presentation, I'm hoping to give a little background information on some of the policies. I think that if people better understand a foundation for how police policies currently work, they can better understand why we're suggesting or why we're enacting the reforms that we are. So for a lot of people, it might be old news, but hopefully there's some people watching today that can learn something. So last thing I want to say before I move into the first slide is that I think that everyone benefits from really clear and really explicit policies. The police know what policy to operate by, and the public can know what policy they're being served by. So this is just the type of trust this committee was intended to foster. But policy reform is just the start. As we've heard tonight, it's part of a much larger conversation about public safety, both within and out of government. So diving right in. Body cameras are my area of expertise, but it's I think when we're talking about body cameras, when they're most often used is in use of force incidents. And so I thought it was really important to start with use of force, what it is, and just kind of work up from there. So just most generally speaking, a use of force is anytime an officer uses force in a situation. Like anything the police do, there are policies which exist to say when it is acceptable to use force and what type of force is acceptable to be used. So legally speaking, I'm gonna start with legal stuff and bring it out from there. Legally speaking, the standard by which a use of force is considered justified is called objectively reasonable. This is what the current Hudson Police Department abides by, and this is what most police departments in the U.S. Abide by. What objectively reasonable means, it comes from a 1989 Supreme Court case called Graham v. Connor. This is a court case in which a diabetic man was suffering from a blood sugar drop. He went into a bodega to buy some food. He started acting erratically, and as a result of his blood sugar being low, the police showed up and they broke the man's leg in an attempt to subdue him. The man sued the police for excessive use of force, but the Supreme Court decided against him, saying that because there was no way that the police officers could have known that the man was a diabetic at the time, they were justified in using the force they did to subdue him. So objectively reasonable, there's the Supreme Court definition right there. But essentially what it is that when you look back at an officer's actions in a use of force scenario, you have to judge them with the information that they could have had at the time and not with the benefit of hindsight. So really important to keep in mind. So with these conversations about evolving public safety, a lot of jurisdictions have actually pushed the objectively reasonable standard into something that is called necessary and proportional. It goes along with this thinking that a use of force policy should not merely dictate the minimum standard for when a use of force is used, but when an officer should use force, like best practices. This is the long definition from the American Law Institute, which they define necessary and proportional. But the essential question at the heart of the use of force policy is, it just asks, was this force absolutely necessary? And was the force proportional to the threat of the police officer at the time? So looking back at that incident I described in Graham v. Connor in the bodega, under this new framework, the question would not be if force could have been used against this man, but was that force necessary against an unarmed diabetic man in distress? So it further clarifies the use of force policy. Hand in hand with that, a lot of police departments have adopted a use of force continuum. Basically, an officer goes into a situation with the lowest level of force, verbal commands, and works their way up all the way up to deadly force. Along the way, notifying the civilian that they are escalating to a higher level of force. Currently, Hudson Police Department training involves some de-escalation tactics, but as I was saying earlier, it's really crucial that these tactics are made explicit in policy, and so that they can be enforced. So in the full report, which is available online, I've done my best to cite concrete policies from other departments that I feel best exhibit best practices. So just examples from other use of force policies across the country. So if you want more specific examples of like how a certain specific thing is done, I highly recommend you check out the report. A lot of work went into it. So here are the specific reforms that we're pushing forward in this year one plan. Number one, build on the standards of objectively reasonable into a policy which outlines the principles of necessary and proportional. Two, create clear and explicit language defining a use of force continuum. Three, create clear and explicit language defining de-escalation with the mandate that an officer must exhaust all tactics of de-escalation before resorting to deadly force. If all other options have been exhausted, an officer needs to provide a clear and audible warning that they are escalating to deadly force. It's a lot, it's all in the report. That kind of concludes this first part of it. I'm really looking forward to working with Mayor Johnson and the Hudson PD and evolving this use of force policy to better address the core principles of public safety. Okay, so all of that I think is really important background for body cameras. A lot of people will be familiar with them. Over the past decade, body cameras have become commonplace in police departments nationwide. As of 2017, just over half of police departments have them, and that number is surely higher now. The idea behind a body camera is that the officer wears the camera, and that camera records an officer's interactions when it's supposed to. Current Hudson Police body-worn camera policy has been adopted from guidelines developed by New York's Department of Criminal Justice Services. It's kind of like a basic template that they sent out to all the departments in the state. That current policy has a few main objectives, just broadly speaking. Just to make sure that the camera is on when it's supposed to and that it's recording in case of an incident. And two, to make sure that the recordings are stored in an appropriate manner. There's a lot of other housekeeping stuff in there, but those are the two main things. So I think it's just important to really break down what we want body cameras to do, and by identifying that, we can, see how we can be doing it better. Body cameras are intended to serve as a sort of check and balance between the public and the police. The logic goes, police have to act right because they're being filmed, and the public has to act right because they're being filmed too. So with that come three main assumptions. The first one, that body cameras supposedly provide a neutral and unbiased witness to an event. The cameras are supposed to record an event as it happens. You don't want the camera manipulating footage in any way. You want it to, be the most objective perspective that it can be. Two, body cameras increase transparency. The public is given access to more context about an incident and how police work. And both of these things combined with the hope that everyone can be held more accountable. With the knowledge that everything is out in the open, all parties involved can be held accountable for their actions. As I kind of hinted at, unfortunately, current policy is pretty vague and it leaves open a lot of gaps that undermine these objectives. So before we even get to that, I think it's really important to understand how the camera actually works, because it has a lot to do with how the current policy is failing us, or could be working better. So this is a body camera on your screen. The Hudson Police Department is currently equipped with body cameras that are made by a private company called Axon. Axon is rebranded from Taser in 2017, and they got their start making stun guns in the early 90s. And now they make a whole bunch of products and software geared towards law enforcement, including evidence.com, which you can sort of see on the right there, which I'll get to in a second. It's like a data management service for police departments. The body camera has four main components: the power switch, the lens, the microphone, and the event button. The first three are pretty self-explanatory. The event button, I wanted to sort of explain that a little more. When a body camera is turned on, it is always recording, but not necessarily saving that video. This is called the buffer mode. When the event button is pressed, the body camera starts saving the video at that moment, plus the last 30 seconds of video, but not audio. So this is the default setting that is currently used by Hudson Police Department. So just to illustrate this real quick, say I'm an officer, I'm walking down the street, I am wearing my body camera on my chest. Someone pulls a gun, I press the event button. If the video just started recording in that moment, we're missing out on crucial information leading up to the incident with the gun. So with the buffer mode, we get more information about what actually happened in the 30 seconds leading up to the push of the button. However, as I said, this is just the video and not the audio, so we actually don't hear the conversation leading up to what was said, but this is just a setting on the camera. Axon body cameras come with the option to record both audio and video up to 120 seconds before the event button is pressed. So this is one of the policies that Mayor Johnson has been stating, and it's really important to giving more context to a situation. Another point, and this seems really obvious, but it's really important, the body camera is placed on the officer's chest facing forward, and as a result, you don't see the body of the police officer. You watch what happened to them, but not necessarily what they did. And this goes with the next point, is that body cameras are intentionally designed to show what the officer saw, not to give the most information possible about an event. For example, body cameras don't see in the dark. This is because of the standards of objectively reasonable, which I outlined earlier in the use of force section. We want to preserve what the officer is seeing and, at that moment, and not, with the hindsight of a camera. So that's just the thought behind the design. This is actually a quote from an interview that I did in my film, and I think it really sums up the thinking behind this. This is from Steve Tuttle, who is the Vice President of Communications for Axon. And he says, we want the body camera to mimic what the human eye can see. If you go beyond that, now you're going to see things that maybe a jury would say, well, the video saw that this was a squirt gun and not a real gun, but the officer can't see that. You want to see what he saw. You saw some camera companies in the early stages that were competing with us using night vision technology. Big mistake. You can't go into court like that because it doesn't mimic the human eye. So when we're talking about body cameras, what we're really talking about is a tool that is designed to see from a very particular perspective. And I want to show a really quick example that illustrates that. This is an image from a piece that the New York Times did a few years back, where they demonstrated the different ways that perspective can change the audience's interpretation of an event. I apologize that it's just an image. I couldn't figure out how to embed the video here, but you can check out the full piece online. This first image you have here is what a body camera would see. It's a wide angle. You can see the distortion at the edges of the frame. The person is coming towards the camera, and it appears as if they're lunging in. Notice that we don't see the officer here, and it could be assumed that the person is making a move at the officer. Now, here's another angle from a different perspective, and we just see it's like two men dancing. And this is just a lighthearted example, but I think it shows just really very quickly how important perspective is. Moving on to the end, just with how these cameras work. At the end of the shift, the police officers dock their cameras and charge it up. The video files are automatically synced from the camera and uploaded to evidence.com, which I mentioned earlier. Evidence.com is a data management service based in the cloud that Axon gives as a way for police departments to store and organize their footage. So when it's uploaded, the video file is saved along with key information like date, time, and officer ID. All that type of information is really useful to have later on in court. Just really quickly, this is what the program looks like. You can see it's essentially just like Google Drive or Dropbox, but for the police departments. They have a video player. This is important. This is what's called an audit trail. Every time a file gets uploaded, renamed, shared, anything, a note is added alongside the video file. This helps prove the chain of custody in court to make sure that all the evidence was handled properly. Okay, this is the last slide, and we'll bring it on home. So I went through all that background to give a foundation and a reasoning behind the policy reforms. I mentioned before the objectives of the body camera program to foster transparency and accountability for both the police and the public. So our first reform, which I mentioned earlier, record audio and video in buffer mode and extend buffer mode to 120 seconds. As I said before, this is to ensure that as much context as possible is preserved in the recording. Second one, prohibit officers from viewing body camera footage before making a sworn statement. So after making a sworn statement, currently, officers may view the footage and make, oh, sorry, under current policy, officers, after an incident, say a shooting, officer-involved shooting, can view the body camera footage and then make a sworn statement. Under this reform, officers would not be allowed to view body camera footage before making a sworn statement. After making that statement, however, officers may view the footage and make any necessary changes with an explanation for why the change was made. So this is just a good faith check all around. Body cameras often capture extremely fraught and intense moments, and it's understandable that someone's memory is not always going to be perfect in the case of the police officer. However, this creates a safeguard against a worst case scenario in which an officer might change their narrative after viewing body camera footage, using available video evidence to retroactively justify a use of force. If more information becomes available through video evidence, then officers still have that opportunity to add that in. This is a policy recommendation that has been backed by numerous groups, including the NYU Law School's The Policing Project and the ACLU. I feel that this reform alone will go a long way towards safeguarding against body camera misuse. Real quick, establish clear guidelines for evidence release. This isn't included in the year one plan, so I'll keep it super quick. It's just to say, if body cameras exist to improve transparency and accountability, then there has to be a clear and explicit policy for when and how the public is given access to video evidence in critical incidents. That's just, we need to, like, if it exists for that purpose, it has to be made available for that purpose with a very clear and defined timeline. Next one. This might seem obvious, but it's really important. Ban video manipulation by police departments. When a police department releases a body camera evidence, they must release it playing at a normal speed without any sort of on-screen visual aids or special effects like zooming or cropping. These types of effects can skew the way that a video is perceived, and that's just not what they're there for. They're there to show what happened to the best of the body camera's ability without any further editorializing by the police department. Lastly, second to lastly, opt out of sharing Hudson PD footage with Axon. When you sign up with Axon, they have terms and conditions essentially where there's a data sharing program. Axon is a private company. They don't reveal what they use departmental data for. So to err on the side of privacy and preservation of civil rights for all the footage that gets captured, I think it's really important that we opt out of any data sharing with Axon, and that's a thing that's very easy to do. Okay, and finally, this is the last one. Before renewing any contract, the body camera program should be audited and evaluated, not just from a budgetary standpoint, but holistically. We need to ask, did these cameras improve community relationships? Did use of force incidents go down? And other questions of a qualitative nature like that. That's it. Thank you for hearing me out. It's a bit longer than I thought, but it's a lot of information. Thank you to Mayor Johnson for this historic initiative. Thank you to Park and the community members who are helping to make it happen. There's a lot of hard work ahead, and I'm really, really excited to get going with it. I think this is a great start. So thank you.
Thank you, Theo. Shaheem, can you put up the slides that I sent you? Joan Hutt from Greater Hudson Promise Neighborhood was supposed to be here tonight, but she wasn't feeling well, and she was going to give a synopsis of safeguarding children of arrested parents. I'll kind of give a run through. As you see on our screen right now, there'll be all of the reforms that we'll be working towards this year. So this process will be rolled out gradually over the year. I'll be working with Park to make sure that all the recommendations are carried out, and we'll be making sure that we're as transparent with the public as possible. Now I'll give a quick overview of safeguarding children of arrested parents. 1 in 14 children in the United States has been impacted by incarceration of a parent at some point in their lives. As of 2012, it was estimated that 10 million children in the United States have experienced parental incarceration in their lifetime, and almost 3 million children currently have an incarcerated parent. We know that each child that is impacted by incarceration has most likely come in close contact with police at some point in their life. This interaction can leave a lasting and often detrimental impact on that child, creating fear, mistrust, and anger towards police. Witnessing an arrest can be particularly traumatic for a child, and without departmental policies and procedures in place to protect the children. The International Association of Chiefs of Police developed a toolkit called Safeguarding Children of Arrested Parents, which includes a comprehensive set of resources, including a model policy that police departments can adopt. This information is on pages 58 through 60 of our reform package that's on the city website for you to learn more. This is something that we definitely want to adopt. This training that it comes with and the toolkit comes with is totally free, which is amazing for us as well. But it also comes with a review on how it's working in our community. And that's something that all of the policies that we're entering into starting this year, we want to make sure that we have that review so we can say if it's working or not. This is, like I said, the first step to creating more reforms and a lasting relationship of trust in our community with the Hudson Police Department and everyone else involved. I'm very thankful for Park for putting all this together. Thankful for the Hudson Police Department for all of their work as well, and everybody just being able to have those difficult conversations. Like I said earlier in the program, I'll be having a public hearing, so I want you to take in everything that you've heard tonight. If you have any questions, you can email me at mayor@cityofhudson.org, or you can show up to the public hearing and hear from myself and other members directly. It'll be a week from today. So I want to thank everyone once again, and all the information that you heard tonight is in the reform package on the city website. So thank you and have a good night.